Hey, what's up folks? This is Keith and you're watching Barber's Auto Help. Thank you so much for watching. This is part 2 of a 2-part series on replacing the water pump, primary timing chain, and primary timing chain tensioner on a 07 Ford Edge 3.5 liter. Now before we get started, there are a couple of special tools that you'll need additionally to complete this job. And one of them is a crankshaft pulley installer. And I'll post a link down in the description to that tool for you. Also, another tool that you'll need is an airlift system. Now this video is going to pick up where we left off in our other video, part 1. Let's go ahead and get into it. Alright, at this point guys, we need to clean up our mating surface where our water pump mounts up there. And what I'm going to be using to do this is a little steel wool. And I'm just going to lightly scuff up that surface where the water pump mates and get all the grime and dirt and stuff off of it. And oh, by the way, I did take a little pocket screwdriver to that port right there and got a lot of that gunk out. If yours has gunk like mine did, you may want to clean that out with a pocket screwdriver before you put your new water pump on. Okay guys, let me break in right here and just make a little side note. I tried out these steel wool pads because I heard that other mechanics were using this and they were having success with it. However, after using it on this vehicle here, I would say it's probably not that great an idea. A lot of the steel fibers were flaking off and getting down into the engine, and you don't want that in the engine, and it was extremely difficult to get all of it out. So don't use the steel wool pads. I would however recommend that you use Scotch-Brite scouring pads, the ones that you use for washing your dishes, the little green ones, and I'll post a link down in the description to those. They work just fine. I've used them in the past. You're not going to have a problem with them. They do flake just a little bit. They do create a little bit of debris. You got to clean that out too, every bit of it, but you're not going to have the problem with the metal fibers getting down in your engine. That's bad news. So I already made this video using the steel wool, and we're gonna use the footage for this video using the steel wool. Again, don't use the steel wool. Use the Scotch-Brite scouring pads in the place of the steel wool. Okay, guys? Now, we're not going to be using really heavy pressure when we clean this mating surface. Just really light pressure. We're not going to gouge the surface or anything like that. We just want to remove that dirt and the grime. Okay, now while you're in here getting this done, go ahead and take care of the silicone. This is where one of the bolt holes for the timing cover goes. Go ahead and take that silicone and just scrape it right off. Just take your razor blade and scrape it right off without gouging the surface. You're going to go diagonally on the surface here, just like that. Scrape that right off. And then we're also going to take that SOS pad and we're going to scuff that surface up really good too to get all the RTV off of it. And you may as well go ahead and take care of the RTV right here too while you're at it. Because the water pump's going to get in the way of you doing that, so do it while it's off. And you can see I'm starting to make some progress on this grime and stuff. I said dirt earlier. There's not really dirt in here, but all this grime, and you just want to get plain metal. I got a little bit more work to do on this, but you want to have a plain metal mating surface. You want it perfectly clean all the way around. And I'm going to go ahead and get the RTV off of that mating surface down there too for that bolt hole for the timing cover, while I have the water pump off. So we're making some really good progress there. I've been working on this for about, I don't know, roughly 20 minutes now. And you can see it's pretty much just plain metal. Now, you can see that that metal is kind of discolored a little bit. You're not going to get rid of all of that discoloration, but you do want to get rid of all the gasket material and all the grime from the surface there. You can see some places down on the bottom there, I still got a little bit more work to do. Once I get it cleaned up all the way, I'll then take a rag, a lint-free rag, after I've gotten all the metal and stuff out of there from the Brillo pad. It does flake off a little bit, like I said. But I'll take a lint-free rag and I'll spray it with some brake clean, and I'll wipe down the surfaces really good with brake clean. That way all the oil and residue is off of that surface. Then I can go ahead and put the water pump on. And oh, by the way, you can see my oil pan is wide open right there. I should have stuffed some rags down in the oil pan to keep any dirt and debris or whatever from falling down into the oil pan and getting trapped in there. Just a little precaution there that I should have done, but you can do before you do this. So I'm a little late to the game, but I did go ahead and stuff a towel down on my oil pan there to catch any debris that might fall down into it. Now, some of you are going to yell at me, oh, you should be using a lint-free towel or something. Well, yeah, you're right. I don't have one. I'm sorry. The best thing to use would be a lint-free towel, and the best thing to use for cleaning up any material that might have come off inside the timing cover area there. The best material would be to use a lint-free rag. So I'm pretty satisfied with what I got there on my water pump. So now I'm going to move to the mating surface where my front engine cover mates to the heads and also the block there. You can see I got this little V right here above the water pump there. I'm going to go ahead and scrape that off with that razor blade. And then I'm also going to use my SOS pad to get any residual RTV off. And I'm going to do the same thing for the remainder of the mating surface where the front engine cover mates to the engine block and the heads there. And there is one other area right over here. See where that bolt hole is right there for the timing cover. Got to clean that up really good. Make sure all that RTV is off of that. Do it in the same manner you did with the other ones that were close to the water pump there. And I think that's about it. So I'm going to go ahead and get rocking on that, and I'll show you what I got after I'm done. And in the process of cleaning this stuff up, you guys may be wanting to know, how in the world do you get the RTV out of that the holes where the bolts go in? And a lot of times what you can do is you can just take a pocket knife, stick the tip of it in there, and just kind of turn it, and that will kind of dig that out a little bit. But don't force it, be gentle with it. You're just getting the rubber RTV off. You're not trying to chase new threads or anything like that, so don't damage your threads in the process. But you want to get that RTV out of that too, and that way it doesn't get in the way of your mating surface there. So I'm making some pretty good progress here. You can see I got the V cleaned off really good there. My water pump mating surface is cleaned up really well. Also the periphery where the timing cover mates up to the engine, it's pretty well clean, and also where the bracket bolts go into the front there, the mating surface is cleaned up pretty good too. I went ahead and took a rag soaked in brake clean, and I wiped down the surface where the water pump mated up really well and got all the debris and stuff off of that. I'm going to go ahead and put my water pump on. Now also I want you to bring your attention to that black dilly whopper right there at the base of where the water pump mates. Don't scrape that off with a razor blade. That actually belongs there. It's supposed to be there. Do not gouge it, cut it, or anything. Just leave it alone. Okay, now your new water pump should come with 2 new gaskets. Go ahead and put them inside the inlay areas there, and go ahead and just put it back up in there. The same way you took it out, you want to put it back in the same way. It takes 9 bolts, torque them down, kind of in a crisscross pattern, and I'll show you that here in just a minute. Take your water pump, just work it up in there. Actually get that that part right there on this side of that guide, and then just work it right up there. You got some dowels that will fit inside these recesses. There's 2 dowels. Once you got it in there, hold it up to the block like that, and go ahead and with your fingers put your bolts in. I'd start out with 2 or 3 bolts opposite, and work them down with your fingers just snug, and then proceed to put the rest of the bolts in. Alright, so we got all of our bolts in our water pump. And excuse me, earlier I said I think I said that I've got 9 bolts that hold the water pump on. Excuse me, it's 8. My apologies. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to torque down the bolts, and I'm going to do it in a kind of a crisscross pattern. I'm going to start with that bolt, move down to this one, move up to that one, move to this one, like go up to that one there, go over here, go over there, you know, in kind of a crisscross pattern. You don't want to just do it in a circle like that. You want to stagger it a little bit there in a crisscross pattern, and make sure you got all 8 of your bolts torqued down to specification, and then we'll move on. Now I do apologize, I don't have torque specs for you guys. I'm not actually using a repair manual making this video here, so you'll need to use your repair manual for that information. Alright, so I got my water pump bolts tight there, and I did use kind of a star or crisscross pattern when tightening down all the bolts there, and I tightened them down a little at a time. I didn't tighten one down all the way and then move to the next one. I kind of snugged it up, and just, you know, you get the picture. A little bit at a time there, and I use German torque, which is good and tight. So I don't suggest you use good and tight. So now I got my water pump on, and I got my mating surfaces cleaned up where my timing cover mates up. And I've got it wiped down with a brake clean soaked rag. all along the periphery where the timing cover makes up, and along that V right there, and also the 3 bolt holes where the bracket bolts up around the water pump there. I got those cleaned up really well, and I got everything down to bare metal. And I also took a rag to these cavities here where any debris might have accidentally got left on the nooks and crannies and whatnot, because you don't want that getting down into your oil pan and then potentially getting to the oil system. So I got a rag up in all those nooks and crannies and cleaned all the, and I'm still working on it, by the way. You can see I still got a little speck right down there, but you want to get every bit of any kind of debris, whether it's from your Brillo pad coming apart, or your steel wool pad coming apart, or just dirt or grime or whatever. Get all that junk out, 100% of it out, before you put this thing back together. Okay, so now we can go ahead and put the timing chain on. I wanted to do that before we put the timing chain on, because the timing chain kind of gets in the way just a little bit there, and now that we got that taken care of, we don't have to worry about that. So let's get into that. All right, so let's take a look at this new timing chain here. You can see that I've got 3 colored links. 2 up top there have orange links, and 1 down on the bottom has a yellow link right here, here, and here. Now the orange links go on the dots on the cam phasers, and the yellow link goes on the dot on the crank sprocket. So let's go ahead and put that thing on. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start out by putting the timing chain on the left hand cam phaser, and then run it up underneath the water pump there, and then up around the right cam sprocket as you're looking at the front of the vehicle there. And then I'm going to finish up by putting that on the crank sprocket. So I took it a step further. I've got the chain routed, of course, and you can see I've got the orange link over the dot on that cam there. Then I've also got the orange link over the dot on this cam here. And while I was at it, I went ahead and installed that guide right there, and it had 2 bolts there and there, and I went ahead and torqued those down. Then I took and installed the longer guide on the side there, and you can see I've got 1 bolt there and then 1 bolt there, and I torqued those down. And then on the crankshaft here, you can see that the dot on the sprocket lines up with the yellow link on the chain there, but you can see that there is some slop on that timing chain, and that's because we haven't put the tensioner guide on yet and the tensioner on. Alright, so I got the tensioner guide on, and you can see right down here there's a little pivot that the little eyelet of the tensioner arm slides right up on, and you can just kind of move the chain up a little bit and kind of slide that tensioner guide in, and you can see how this tensioner guide just kind of goes in and out like that. Well, when you put your tensioner on right there, it's going to apply that forward pressure on that guide and keep the timing chain tight. So now we're going to go ahead and put our tensioner on. Okay, so this is our new tensioner here, and I took the old bolts out of the old tensioner, and I'm just going to reuse those. Now you'll notice on the back side here there's no gasket, and there's not supposed to be a gasket there. It just bolts up plain metal to plain metal. Now when we bolt this up, before we bolt it up, you want to make sure that the mating surface where this bolts up is perfectly clean, free of any foreign material, and is good and dry. So now I'm just going to go ahead and put this in place, bolt it up, torque it down. Then after that, we'll ensure that our timing marks are still on, and I will remove this pin here, and that will allow the plunger to come out of the tensioner to apply tension to the timing chain. Okay, we got our tensioner on, and you can see that the plunger goes in a special little recess on the tensioner guide here. Be sure that that's in there, and actually when you bolt it up, it only point one way, so it's kind of hard to mess it up there. Now I did notice that whenever I was trying to get the tensioner in place to bolt it up and torque those bolts down, it didn't want to match up just right with the bolt holes, because this timing chain down here wasn't on the sprocket all the way, so I had to kind of force it up like that, and then push the guide this way a little bit, hold it with that thumb there, just kind of work the tensioner in place like that, and then work the bolts down by hand that way. Once I worked them down all the way, snugged them up, I torqued them down, and now it's good to go. Now tensioner's in place. All my guides are on. We need to double check our timing marks. You can see that the crank sprocket is on. The dot is right there on the yellow link. Let's go up top, make sure our cams are still on. All right, the dot is just underneath the orange link on the back cam there, and same thing on the front cam there. Now those links go directly over that dot, and they have to go directly over that dot. They can't go to the side of the dot, diagonal to the dot, or anything. That has to be exactly in the middle. So let me give you a different angle on this so you can see just how exactly on it has to be. You can see on this front cam here that link kind of straddles that dot right there. So that's how you know that link is on the right spot. And you cannot have your timing off one tooth, two teeth, three teeth. You have to be directly on. So make sure that you're directly on these timing marks, okay? Luckily for me, I've got a new timing chain tensioner, and it comes equipped with this little peg here that kind of locks it in place. I'm going to remove that peg, and you see how the tensioner guide kind of came out a little bit there. That it released that piston inside that tensioner. So now we're ready to go. And once the engine is cranked up, will be delivered to the back side of that piston and supply a little bit more holding force on that timing chain there. All right, at this point here, we've got our timing chain tensioner released, and we're pretty well ready to go. But before you keep going, just go ahead and check your marks again, and you know how to do that. Also make sure that the teeth are down in the chain like they're supposed to be. Make sure that the chain is riding inside the guides as they're supposed to be, right in the middle of the guides there, and just make sure nothing's out of place. And now we need to put our cam phaser oil delivery brackets back on, and you need to inspect your seals before you place it back on. If you don't feel confident that your old seals are good enough to do the job, then replace them. These seals here, and also that seal there. Now, where that seal there mates up to the head there, take you a lint-free rag and wipe that down really good. Make sure it's free of foreign material, because you want to get a good seal on it. Now we're just going to place this right up here like that. Alright, then we're going to run these bolts down by hand. I'm going to do all three of them by hand. Alright, we got that bracket in place there. We got all three of our bolts torqued down, and now we want to do the same thing in the same manner for the front cam there. Now I will mention that the seals right here, they aren't your normal seals. I'm not sure what they're made out of, but they're not normal rubber O-rings, and they kind of push in a little bit and they spring out a little bit. I don't know if you can see that or not, but it's got a little slit in there, a little diagonal slit. All three of them have a little diagonal slit like that to allow them to expand and contract. There's that one right there. So if you see that, that's how they're supposed to be. And like I said, these aren't rubber, they're a different type of material, but you just want to make sure that it's okay all the way around and that you're not missing parts of it and stuff. As I said at the beginning, replace it. If you're not sure, replace it. That's the best policy. Okay, now we got our other bracket on. Now what we want to do is we want to bring our attention back to cleaning. Be sure to get every single nook and cranny cleaned out with a rag, a lint-free rag, and then get you a clean lint-free rag, and you want to soak that with some brake clean and clean your mating surfaces where the front timing cover or the front engine cover mate to the block and the cylinder heads there. And don't forget about the three areas where the three bracket bolts go through. One right there, and one right there. Be sure that you have nothing but metal there, and clean that up with some brake clean also. What we're trying to do is we're trying to avoid getting or leaving any kind of oil residue on the mating surface. That has to be perfectly clean and free of any oil residue or debris, or else you won't have a proper seal between the timing cover and the engine there. It's very important that you do this, and your repair manual actually may recommend a different product. Use whatever your repair manual recommends. You definitely have to make sure it's nothing but metal, okay, because the RTV's got to seal up and it won't seal to oil, so you may end up with an oil leak if you don't clean this properly, guys, okay? And the same thing goes for your timing cover too, and I'll show you that here in just a second. But please just be sure that you have this thing perfectly clean. Now this is the timing cover, and you can see that I went ahead and cleaned up the surface, the mating surface of it also. I used a razor blade, of course, and I also used the SOS pad, and I got every bit of that RTV off of this mating surface. There is some more work I got to do in some areas, but all in all, I've got a nice clean plain metal surface to mate up to the engine block and the cylinder heads there on the front of the engine. And of course, you got your 3 bolt holes for your mounting bracket that have to be cleaned up also. You want that surface to be just plain metal on those. Now, while you're at it, you may as well go ahead and replace your front crank seal. Now, we want to flip it over to the other side to do that. And you notice I got my timing cover on top of something that's kind of soft. This is a four-wheeler. It's got a nice cushiony seat right there. Don't put this on concrete where the mating surface would come in contact with it. It could scar that up and gouge it and cause leaks. So you want to protect that surface. Don't let it get gouged up. Alright, so I'm going to take this seal puller right here. Just going to put it inside the lip of that seal and just pull it right off like that. Now when I put the seal puller in there, I make sure that the hook grabbed the seal right there, and we're going to be careful not to gouge that metal surface up where that seal goes into the timing cover there. So I didn't do that. I actually hooked it on the actual seal itself to pull it out. Now we need to put our new seal in there, but before we do that, you want to make sure there's no debris or anything like that inside where the seal goes in there. I'm going to take our new seal, and you're going to need something to put the seal in with. Now you see that there's a little lip on the outside of the seal. We don't want to damage that lip, and just so happens I have this bearing race here that's been modified a bit that fits just right over that seal like that, and you got the lip inside there so that the lip doesn't get damaged, and also it will stop the seal from going too far into the timing cover when I bang it in. Now something that's a great idea to do to your new seal before you put it in is pack the back side full of grease all the way around. You want grease packed in all the way around that. Use some probably some high temp wheel bearing grease or something like that. That'll work out just fine. But you see this, it's got this little spring inside there, and when you go to bang the new seal in, there's a good chance, if that's not packed up with grease, that that spring could fall out. So be sure you do that. That's the tip that we use at the shop. So we're just going to sit that down here right like that. And we're going to put a bearing race installer on top of that. Then we're going to take a mallet and we're just going to bang it in. Now when you're banging it in, you want to make sure that it's going in nice and even. It's not going in there crooked. I'm a little bit crooked, but not enough to where I can't correct it. But you don't want one side to go down all the way and then the other side to go down after that. You want it to go down evenly. We're just going to keep going. Alright, let's see what we got here. Now you see how that lip goes inside that race? And I'm not pushing down on that lip or gouging it or anything like that. It goes perfectly inside that race like that. And you see how that race is wide enough to where it won't go into the hole that the seal goes down into. It kind of stops on that ledge right there. That's what you want, because you don't want to push this seal in too far. You want it to stop even with this ledge here. And you can see that the seal is level with the surface all the way around. You see that right there? See how it's level with that surface? Same thing right here. Same thing right there. And of course on the back side here too. So that's a good installation. This is a homemade tool right here. You may have to rig something up yourself, or you can buy the tool that's specifically made for this. I don't know what the part number is for that, but you can do your research, of course, and find one if you need one. Now, we're fixing to put RTV on the front timing cover, or the front engine cover, and place it back down in there and reseal it. Now, it's very, very difficult to work that thing in there because there's not a whole lot of room, as you already know. And what we're trying to avoid is nicking the RTV on any surface, such as these bolt heads here, or anything down in there, before we actually get it into place and then move it up towards the engine there. So you don't want to remove any RTV in the process of sitting it down in there. So what I would suggest is doing a couple of dry runs. Just practice how you're going to do this. Now, when the timing cover goes in, you want it to go down, and I'm going to use my hand here as an example, and you would have everything lined up. And they make dowels that go in this part of the heads here that help to guide the timing cover on, because what you're going to do is you're going to go directly in like that, because if you don't and you got it kind of cocked this way or that way, you'll end up hitting something like this or anything down there. And the goal is to make the timing cover up perfectly, have the bolt holes line up perfectly. That way you don't hit anything and you don't knock off that RTV. So you have to use some precision and some patience in doing this. And like I said, a couple of dry runs first before you do it with the RTV, just to practice. Now, what I mean by dry run is I don't have any RTV on this timing cover yet. I'm going to go ahead and work it down and see what's the best way to go about this without making any contact between any of the engine components and anywhere where RTV might be placed on this timing cover, so that we don't rub the RTV off. Now, I do have the engine jacked up just a bit. That does help to jack up the front of the engine just a little bit, to help allow the timing cover to go down in between the AC hose and the front of the engine there. So let's go ahead and do that dry run. I'm going to go ahead with our practice run here. And you might want to do a couple of these before you actually go in with it wet with RTV, because you need to come up with a plan of attack that's going to work for you. Now, the object to the game here is to slide this thing in without rubbing the RTV off. And it can be done. It is very, very tight. And on a scale of 1 to 10, and getting this thing on there without messing up the RTV on your timing cover, it's an oh my gosh. So be ready to fight. We're going to be fighting. We're almost in there. Right, so I managed to get that in there. I might need to practice that a couple of more times, because I did scuff it a few times, and I need to jack the front of the motor up just a teensy bit more to help with the clearance there. But the dry run is very important, guys, because you need to come up with a plan of attack so that you don't mess up that RTV. You can't mess up the RTV. If you do, it's not going to seal up right. You're going to have a leak, okay? So take your time with these practice runs. Just make sure you got it down packed, okay? We're just about ready to put this thing on, and but what you need to do before you put it on, and you're not going to see me put it on, guys, and the reason I'm not going to show you is because once you put the RTV on this thing, you've only got so many minutes that you have until that RTV dries. So I'm going to have to put all of my 3 brain cells on this to get this thing in there before it actually dries. So but before you put the RTV on, sit it upright, spray this area down where the RTV is going to go with some brake clean along the periphery here. Careful not to get it on your nice clean new seal there. Do not get brake clean on that. All around here, clean that, clean that, and clean that. After you got the timing cover wiped down really good with some brake clean, go ahead and take a lint-free rag again and soak it in some brake clean and wipe down the mating surface of the engine where the timing cover mates up to the engine. So get that good and clean with a lint-free rag and brake clean, and then take another clean lint-free rag and soak it with some isopropyl alcohol. Wipe down your surfaces just as you did with the brake clean. Clean the mating surface on the timing cover and also on the engine where the timing cover mates up with it. And then after that, I would suggest using Motorcraft metal surface prep wipes. Now, Motorcraft is not a sponsor of Barber's Auto Help, nor is Ford, but I did want to mention this. This is a really good product and really preps it really nicely for the RTV. So use these metal surface prep wipes on the timing cover where the RTV sits on the timing cover, and also use the prep wipes on the engine where the timing cover mates up to the engine. And then you're ready for your RTV. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be applying a 5mm bead of silicone all along the periphery of this timing cover right here on this flat spot of the right here of the mating surface of the timing cover. And I'm going to do that all the way around. I'm going to go in the inside of the bolt holes, okay, because that's where the oil needs to be sealed out, is on the inside there. And then we're going to put 5mm bead, circular bead of silicone around the bolt holes for the bracket, and then the same thing right here. Go on the inside of the bolt holes, just like that. And the same thing down this edge right here. Now you also need to apply a small bead of silicone where the head meets the block right there, also right there, also on the back here where the head meets the block, and on the front right there where the head meets the block, and then also where the block meets the oil pan right there, and also right there. Put a little bead of silicone on those little slits. And this is what I'm calling silicone right here, guys. This is silicone RTV gasket maker. This is ultra gray. Now your manual may suggest that you use something else. I suggest that you use whatever your repair manual says to use. For me, I'm going to use this stuff. I've used it before and have had luck with it. But many people will argue that this isn't the right product to use for this job here. Again, use what your repair manual says to use, but you're going to want to use some kind of a RTV silicone gasket maker for this. Okay, and once I have my timing cover in place and mounted against the engine, I'm going to go ahead and put my bolts in, of course, all around the periphery there and along that V, and I'm going to go ahead and proceed to torque them down in a sequence that I'm not getting from a repair manual. I'm just using experience for this. But I'm going to start with that one, move over here to this one, go to that one, go to this one, go to that one, go to this one, and then I'm just going to kind of crisscross my way up until I get all of them. And I'm going to get the ones on the V there too. I may hop up there after one of these and tighten one or two of those up and then crisscross back out here. But you're not going to go like that around the edge and then like that. You want to stagger it. How you're tightening this down, you want to stagger it. Use kind of like a star pattern, if you will. That's a bunch of points on that star, but you get what I'm saying. And then once I got that torqued down, I'll proceed to put my bracket back on for the engine mount, and I'll torque those 3 bolts down also. And here's what I got. I've got my bead of silicone along there. Kind of messed up right here, guys. I got a little sloppy and got away from the inside edge of the flat part. You want to do the opposite on yours. Kind of get that bead nice and straight near the inside edge of the flat part where you're supposed to be putting RTV. The rest of the timing cover looks pretty good as far as where you want to put the bead of silicone. Now you can see I got it on the inside all the way around on my bracket bolt holes there. And I've got it going up this way too, and then along that V right there. Okay, so I got my timing cover on, and I have all my bolts torqued down, and I've also got my engine mount bracket right there on the front of the timing cover bolted up. So on the center bracket here, what I did on that was I worked it up through the bottom from up underneath there, and I put the lower bolt, you know, you got 3 bolts on it, 1, 2, and then one up underneath there where you can't see, 3 bolts, and I put that bolt in there first before I slid it up into place. And in order to get that bolt in on the bottom, I had to lower the engine down just a bit because there's not a whole lot of clearance between the body here, of course, and the front of the timing cover there. So you lower it down just a bit, and you work that lower bolt into position and get it into the hole, start it, and then go ahead and start that bolt. Once you got that bolt and that bolt started, then you want to lift your vehicle up just a bit, and then you can slide your third bolt in once you've gained clearance to add that bolt right there between the body and the timing cover. Go ahead and put that bolt in, and then torque down all 3 of those bolts. So that's how I did it, and that's the way I found that worked the best for that. Okay, so now we need to put our harmonic balancer back on now that we have the front cover all torqued down. And before we put it back on, you want to take a little bit of oil and just smear it around the outside of the shaft that goes into the seal, and do the same thing with your finger on the inner lip of that seal there, just kind of lubricate it a little bit. Okay, so we got our harmonic balancer up in place, and you can see it's not pressed in all the way, and you can't really get it up in there. You don't want to bang it in with a hammer, okay guys? You need to use your pulley installer that I told you about at the beginning of the video there. Now, this pulley installer is a generic pulley installer, and it fits all kinds of different vehicles, and I found that this doesn't actually fit my vehicle exactly right. Notice that washer dangling on the front there, so I had to add that to it to improvise a bit. And actually I really need a little bit of a larger washer than that to make this work right, but without that washer, this pusher was wanting to go inside of the front of the harmonic balancer there, and that could cause it to seize up inside there, and we may not be able to get it out. So I put that washer, additional washer on the front there to improvise a little bit. Now you want to make sure that this part goes all the way in, and you want to do it by hand. Alright, and this isn't bottomed out. There's plenty of room between this and the harmonic balancer. This has stopped just by me tightening it up with my fingers. You don't really want to go with a wrench on that. Just snug is just fine with your fingers. Now this nut right here, you're going to wind it down, and this is your pusher, and it's going to push that harmonic balancer on. And we're going to take an open-end wrench, and it doesn't take a whole lot of well, if I can get the daggum wrench opened up enough, it doesn't take a whole lot of effort to press this pulley on. So we're just going to run this down all the way until it stops, and then we're going to take it off, and we're going to put our bolt in. Alright, so we got it pushed on. You can see that the inside lip here of the pulley is just about almost flush with the crank right there, and it's not going to go all the way flush, by the way, but that's far enough to where we can put our bolt in and torque it down. Now I'm going with a new harmonic balancer bolt. It's been my experience that most of the time whenever you take a harmonic balancer bolt out, they recommend you replace it. So you just transfer the washer from the old bolt to the new bolt, and that's what I did there, but that's a brand new bolt. And we're going to run it down by hand. So we got that in there, and now what we got to do is torque it down, and I'm going to do that off camera. Be sure to follow your repair manual for that information and torque specification. Alright, now we got to put our engine mount on, but before we do that, you want to jack the engine up just a bit so that way it's on the right level to receive the engine mount. And I've got my engine mount ready to go. We're just going to lift it up and set it right down into place there. Just like that. And I like to put a little Loctite on these studs here, all 4 of those studs, and also on the bolts that go to the body there. Little blue Loctite would be preferred in my opinion. We got our engine mount in. It's all bolted up. All 4 of the bolts are tightened up where it meets the timing cover, and also these 3 bolts are tightened up where it meets the body. Now when you're tightening those up, you want to try to keep this as level as possible. You don't want to tighten it up with the engine jacked up way high, because if you do that and you tighten those bolts down and then you tighten those bolts down, it's going to want to push the engine down towards the jack. If anything, you want to pull the engine up off the jack. You don't want to push down onto the jack. That just adds more weight onto that oil pan there. So be careful with that, okay? And I should also mention that some manuals may actually recommend that you replace the bolts that were taken out of this engine mount here. So refer to your repair manual for that information. And don't forget about your bracket that goes over the top of your engine mount there. Tighten those down, torque them down. Now, so the timing cover's been on there for quite some time, about a day and a half or so. And the RTV is nice and dry. Now, we are concerned a little bit about anything that might have gotten into the oil pan. There shouldn't be anything in the oil pan if you were careful enough. But just as some added insurance, take your drain plug out of your oil pan, put a catch pan up underneath it, run you a quart or two of oil down that hole right there where your phaser is, and run you a quart or two of oil down this side here where the phaser is. And just let it run out the oil pan, just in case there might be something in there. That'll give you a little added insurance of getting that stuff out. And now we need to install our VCT solenoids, and I wipe them down really well. You want to use a lint-free cloth whenever you're wiping these down, but get any lint or any debris, dirt, or whatever off of this, including up here too, not just down here where the oil goes through. Now we're just going to go ahead and stick this right in that hole right there. Just kind of gently work it down, don't force it. It should slide right in. Run your bolt down, and then you want to torque that bolt down to specification. And then the VCT solenoid on the back head there, do that one likewise. Okay, now we need to prep our valve covers for installation, and we're going to be replacing the spark plug tube seals on this vehicle, and also we're going to be replacing the grommets that go on the bolts. And the way you do that is you pull the bolt right out, and you got to kind of yank on it a bit, and we're just going to cut that right off with a razor blade. So you can see I split that. We're just going to remove it from the bolt, just like so. And we got to put our new grommet on. Now your new grommet should be nice and gummy, so it shouldn't be too terribly difficult to get this thing on the bolt there. Now the skinny side goes down. I'm just going to put it right over that rib just like that. And you can see I'm doing this one-handed, so it's not very hard at all. This goes down into the valve cover just like that, and you're going to snap that into place. There, and that was good to go. And you're going to do that for the remaining bolts on this valve cover and the other valve cover. Okay, now for the spark plug tube seals, you're going to have to remove the old ones, and the way you want to do that is place the valve cover on something like a piece of cardboard. So you see I've got the valve cover laying down on the bottom side of it like so, and we just got to drive these seals out. Now what I use to drive them out is a socket. Now this is a 29mm impact socket, and it fits right down in that hole there, and it's small enough to actually go all the way through the hole, but not too large to get stuck in there. And you can see here, this is that 29mm socket. This is a new seal, and you can see that the diameter of the socket is actually just a little bit smaller than the seal, so it'll pop right through. So what you're going to do is you're going to sit that in there like that, and you're going to drive it out with a mallet or a dead blow hammer straight down through the bottom. Now when you go in with the new one, you're going to go in with a little bit larger socket. This is a 32mm socket, and by the way, you may not be using this brand, so it may actually be a different diameter on the outside what you're using there. What you're going for is you're going to go for the diameter of the socket being a little bit larger than the diameter of the seal. And let me show you here. You see that socket is larger in diameter than that seal, and the reason you want that is because you got a lip inside there. See that lip right there? Using a larger diameter socket, then the seal will prevent you from putting the seal in too far. So what you're going to do, knock it out and knock your new seal in until the socket bottoms out. And you can see when I put the socket down in there, it's bottoming out on that ledge, not the seal. So that will prevent you from putting it in too far. And you just pop that in with a dead blow hammer there. And by the way, when you are driving the seals out and putting the new seals in, you notice I don't have my bolts in the valve cover. Go ahead and take those off, set them to the side. You want this thing sitting flat on some kind of a soft surface, okay? You see I got mine on cardboard. So you're not going to see me taking the seals out and putting them back in, but this is the setup I would use right here. Dead blow hammer. It's a rubber dead blow hammer, and the sockets that I mentioned earlier. Okay, now once you got your spark plug tubes installed, you then want to make sure that the inlay portion of the valve cover is cleaned out really well, where the valve cover gasket goes into it. If you have any oil varnish or any debris or anything in that inlay area, you want to get it out. And by the way, a little steel wool works really well for that. This is the leftovers of an SOS pad. This works really well getting down in those nooks and crannies and getting any residue or varnish out. So you're gonna have perfectly clean metal, and yours probably won't look this clean. I had the privilege of using a parts washer, so I put mine in a parts washer, and that's why mine looks so pristine like it is. But you can have varnish inside here and whatnot. You just don't want any varnish inside the inlay area or any debris or anything. You want it perfectly clean to receive your new gasket. And here we go with our new gasket. It just pops right in that little inlay area there, and you want to work it in all the way around and make sure it's seated really well in there. Okay, now as far as the cylinder head, you got to make sure that your mating surface is perfectly clean too. And really all I had to use on that was a rag soaked and brake clean. So I took a rag soaked and brake clean and I just wiped it down really well all the way around, and you can see I got a perfectly clean metal surface on there. Use care when you do wipe it down. If you have dirt and debris up there, don't sweep the dirt and debris into your engine. Sweep it out of the engine. So don't get it inside there. So be careful about that, okay? And something else you want to watch out for on older ones, like mine. Mine's a 2007, and you can see that this convolute on this wire harness is coming apart and it's just flaking off everywhere. When you take your valve cover off and you want to put it back on, there's a good chance that that convolute could peel off and get down into your engine. You got to use care not to let that happen, okay? I probably should have taped mine up before I took this apart, but hindsight is 20/20. Now a little trick to help with the installation of this valve cover. I'm going to take a little bit of oil and just lubricate the outside of the spark plug tube here, and I'm going to do the same thing with the others. Just get it nice and lubricated there. I'm also going to put a little bit around the VCT solenoid. And then you can also wipe a little oil inside the VCT solenoid gasket right there, or seal, and also your spark plug tube seals. Alright, so our valve cover is all set to go. You can see I got the bolts back in. They're popped back in there with those grommets. Now there's one other thing we want to do before we go to slap it on. Where the front timing cover meets the cylinder head, put a good little bead of RTV silicone right there, and also down here. And oh, by the way, I didn't mention it, but there should have been some silicone right there when you take yours off. You want to scrape away the old silicone, and on that side and on that side, and make sure you got a perfectly clean metal surface right there too. So I got that all set. Now I'm ready to put my valve cover on. I'm going to do that off camera because I can't hold the camera and do it at the same time, but I'm just going to kind of work it up underneath that wire harness right there. I'm going to be careful not to get any of that crusty convolute down in the engine while I do it. Alright, there you go. I've got mine on, and I've got the bolts torqued down. Now the way I torque the bolts down, I start right here, move to this one, go to that one, move to this one, go to this one, go to that one, go over here to this one, that one, bam, bam, and bam. So kind of do it in a staggered pattern. You can also do it in an outward spiral pattern. You can start right here, go there, and then just work your way out like so. But you don't want to just tighten one down and just move around in a circle. that won't do very well. Alright, so we got that valve cover done, and I'm not going to make you watch me do the back one because I've already done it. I'm just going to step ahead here just a minute. Before you put your rear valve cover on, go ahead and reroute your power steering reservoir and hose where it's supposed to go there, just to kind of get it out of the way. It makes it easier to put that valve cover on. The back is very similar. You're just working from a different angle on that. So go ahead and do your back one too. And in the meantime, I'm going to go ahead and put my 3 coils in up front here. I've already got my coils in on the back, and snug those up. So I'm plugging my coils back in. I've got them torqued down, all 3 of them, and I've got these already plugged in and locked. You see how I've just pushed that red locking tang back up in there. We'll take this one and slide it up till it clicks. Alright, that's the regular locking tang. Then we're going to lock it into place with the red one. Okay, same thing on all 6 of them, by the way. And of course, don't forget to put your dipstick back in there. Then of course, you need to reconnect your VCT solenoid. Make sure it clicks into place. Give it a little tug. And anytime you're plugging in anything, guys, give it a little tug to make sure it is actually locked in. Now, on my convolute, those little female retainers that slid down over these bolt studs, mine all broke. So I'm going to have to get creative in order to secure this wire harness. I'm not sure how I'm going to do that. I may have to zip tie it or something, but hopefully you don't have this problem. Typically, you don't have to deal with something like that, so I'll just go ahead and skip that. Let's go ahead and lay our injector harness back over and plug our injectors back in. See right here, you got these little female receptacles that go right over the head of those studs. On this one, that's what you should have on the front there, but mine are broke off. So I'm going to have to improvise later on with that. I got that pushed in. That's nice and secure. Now we can go ahead and reconnect our injectors. All 3 of them on the front. And you want to push your connector down till it clicks. Like that. And give the connector a tug. Make sure it don't come back up. Alright. So that was in there good. And do the same thing with the next 2. And as mentioned earlier, the back valve cover is similar to the front valve cover. You got to get your coils in, bolt them down. There's 3 coils. Plug each coil back in, snap the connector in, and then lock it with the red tang. Now a little difference back here, you have your PCV valve. You got to plug that back in, make sure it snaps, make sure it's secure. Same thing with your VCT solenoid, make sure that's in there. Your harness also has female receptacles to receive those studs. Be sure all of those are in wherever you may have them. See, I got it right there. And make sure your injectors are plugged in and secure. I had to do a little dum-dum on that one. Just ignore that. And one other thing too, you have your O2 sensor connector, and it's snapped onto a little bracket, and that bracket goes into a hole that's a part of the valve cover. You can't see it, or actually maybe I can get a better angle on it for you. Yeah, see that? That little bracket goes down into a little receptacle that's a part of the valve cover. Be sure that you snap that in, and if you disconnected your O2 sensor, which I didn't, but if you did, be sure to reconnect it. Now also, I went ahead and took the liberty of putting my power steering pump back on, and I know I didn't show you that, but it was very difficult to do in the first place, and filming it would have really been a pain. So I've got it bolted back up. Now the way that I did it, I didn't start out from the top. I went down bottom, and I'll show you. Okay, so you're looking up at the power steering pump, and this is that black thing right there is the CV axle boot, the inner boot. What I did is I held the pump up into place, and I slid it over the dowels and held it into place, and then with the other hand I worked one of those bolts up to my hand that was holding the pump in. Yeah, a little acrobatics there. And while I was holding the pump in with that hand, I used 2 fingers and I screwed one of those bolts in, and I got it started. Once I got it started, I could then get the other bolt in, and then I worked those down and snugged it up. Once I had it snugged up, then I went up top and I did a little nosedive behind the engine like we did when we were taking that top bolt out, and I put it in the reverse procedure of taking it out. So you're just going to put it right back in there. I tightened the top one down, then I came back down here and I tightened both of those bolts up. So real big pain in the butt. That's about 30 minutes of work that you guys didn't see, and like you can see how difficult it is to give you a visual of just this. So that's why I didn't film that, so sorry about that. Now back up top here, you do have a wire that goes to the power steering switch that's on the pump right there. Be sure you plug that back in, okay? And the way I've got mine routed is I've got the wire harness routed along the front of the valve cover right here, and then it's got one of the female receptacles that goes right over the stud on the back side of the valve cover there. Now if your receptacle broke, like a lot of mine did, you may want to zip tie it up maybe to this harness going by the VCT solenoid. But be sure to get that electrical connector plugged back in. It does snap into place. Once it snaps into place, give it a little tug on the connector and make sure it's seated correctly. Well, all right, we're getting close. It's time to put the intake manifold back on. Now before you do that, you want to go ahead and clean up the mating surface right here where the intake manifold sits. And usually all you need for this is a rag soaked with brake clean. Just wipe it down real good and that should do the trick. Now as far as the seal on this intake manifold, the gasket here, I've reused a bunch of these and I've not had any problems with it yet. However, if you suspect you may need to replace your gaskets or you're afraid that you might have a leak afterwards, go ahead and replace them. You know, you got it out already. I don't mind taking it back apart if I do have a vacuum leak. And like I said, I've reused a bunch of these before and I've not had a problem. So I'm going to reuse mine and stick it back on there. Just make sure it's nice and soft and it's pliable. All right. Now the installation of this intake manifold is reverse procedure. I'm going to put it in just like I took it out, just reverse or opposite of that. I'm going to go in kind of sideways like this and then bring it in like that and push it down. Now do note you got to reconnect things back here that plug into the back of the intake manifold. This connector right here goes to the connector on the back of the intake manifold where the PCV breather or PCV tube goes to. So be sure to reconnect that, and also while you're at it, go ahead and hook up your brake booster hose and position it into place with the hose clamp secured on the end there so you don't have any vacuum leaks. And also, as you know, the PCV hose has to go down over the top of the PCV valve as you're putting the intake manifold back into position. All right, we got our intake manifold into place there, and I do have my brake booster hose hooked up in the back. You can't see it, but it is hooked up and the hose clamp is pushed up on it. The PCV tube, I'll run you back there. I've got it reconnected down on the bottom of the PCV valve. I've also got the electrical connector connected on the back of the intake. Now, something to be careful about when you're positioning this intake manifold into place, make sure that your gaskets didn't pop out. And what you can do is you can just lift this up a bit, just fill up underneath it with your fingers and make sure that that gasket is still in place on all 6 tubes there. So once that's good, go ahead and put your intake manifold back into place there, and then we're going to put our bolts in and we're going to torque them down. And the way I'm going to torque mine down is I'm going to start with that one, work over to this one, go to this one, that one, and then that one. Now hold up, I almost forgot about something. Now I've got the bolts on the bottom of the intake manifold ran down by hand. They are threaded in, but don't forget you got that bolt right back there. Go ahead and get that started too before you get too froggy torquing those down. And then also you got the bolt that goes right there also. Go ahead and get that started by hand before you torque these down. Now once you got those started on the back there, torque these down in the sequence that I discussed earlier or the sequence that's in your repair manual. So once you got this part torqued down, go ahead and tighten that bolt up and then that bolt. Okay, so now I got my intake manifold torqued down. All the bolts on the bottom here were torqued down, plus the one in the back and the one down there. And I went ahead and took the liberty of reconnecting my harness push rivets here. And you can see you got 3 of them that go into the intake manifold, and also ran my coolant line on the top part here. I had that taken out of those earlier, so I put them back in. And I also reconnected the throttle body and locked it into place there. And then the evap purge valve, I went ahead and put that back into place. It just slides right back on that receptacle. Reconnected the hose here. Now once the hose was put on, I had to push this clip back into place to lock it in. And I even reconnected this line where it went back to the intake manifold. And that clip right there, when you push it in, it locks into place on its own. So you shouldn't have to manipulate that. Just push the whole line back on the nipple back there and it'll lock in. And now I got my air filter, air inlet and air filter box put back in, and I've got it, the tangs in place there on the back half, and the snaps are snapped back in. The mass airflow sensor is reconnected, and the red locking tang on the bottom is pushed in. And you can see right here that this is supposed to be electrical tape to this. I'll fix that later on, but that should be attached to the top side of the air filter box there. And don't forget, back here you have your hose clamp. You have your hose clamp right there that needs to be tightened up where that air duct meets the throttle body. So go ahead and tighten that up too. And then we have our PCV breather tube. It goes in place like this. It just snaps right into place right here. Give it a tug, make sure it's in all the way. And then the bottom part, or in this part, goes on the air duct right there. Snap it into place, give it a tug, make sure it's in there secure. And don't forget this wire harness that goes on the right side of the intake manifold. There is a Christmas tree rivet that goes up into that receptacle right there. Go ahead and put it back into place, push it in. And then this wire right here, remember it was zip tied up to the evap purge valve. You can go ahead and zip tie that back up, and then the bottom part here you can zip tie it back up to this harness here. And don't forget, on your snorkel here you have this little hose that goes in the back there that pushes into the snorkel. Be sure to reconnect it. Okay, now for the fun part, we got to put our power steering belt back on, and you can see that I've got the belt routed on the inside race of the harmonic balancer right there, and then on the other part I've got it routed up under the power steering pulley there. Now you see that zip tie on there? I got it looped through that hole in the pulley. What we're going to do is we're going to run that belt on, and the way we're going to do that is we're going to turn the crankshaft clockwise while we have our hand on there on that pulley and the belt, assisting it in staying in those grooves and helping the power steering pump pulley to turn. So we're going to turn it, and it's going to pull that stretchy belt and stretch it onto that power steering pump. And that's what keeps the tension on that belt. It's a stretchy belt. It's a special belt. You can't just put any belt on there. And when you go to order this belt, be sure that you get the correct one and look it up by application. So I'm going to go ahead with my right hand. I'm going to turn that crank, and that's going to cause the belt to turn. And in the meantime, I'm going to put my left hand up underneath that pulley and kind of assist that belt in routing it around that power steering pump pulley. Okay? And of course I've got to do that off camera, and you'll see why when you go to work on this. There's no room in there. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll show you what I got. Okay, now our belt is on. Now you can see up there I put about 5 or 6 zip ties on there finally. I tried to do it with one earlier, and it kept on snapping on me or wanting to come off. And I found out that one zip tie was not quite strong enough to hold that belt on, so I had to put 4 or 5, maybe 6 of them on there, and then I finally got it to go around. Now I'm going to keep it real with you guys. This was a pain in the butt, laying on my back and doing that. It's pretty difficult. On a scale from 1 to 10, it's an 11. For some people, it may be an 11. For some people, it may be more easy. But I thought it was horrible on my back. I'd rather do this on the lift, but anyway, you got to do what you got to do. And don't forget, on your power steering belt, be sure to cut those zip ties off of the pulley, okay? Don't start it up with the zip ties still on. Once you got your power steering belt on, go ahead and put your serpentine belt tensioner back on. And remember, there's 3 bolts that hold it on. It's probably easiest to put it up through the bottom get that bolt started, and then go up top and get the other two started, and be sure to torque those bolts down. Alright, go ahead and put the serpentine belt back on, and that's the reverse procedure of how you took it off. Alright, so I got the wire harness going to the computer routed. You can see that it goes up underneath the power steering reservoir, up around that way there, and then to the computer. Plug in all three of your connectors there. You got these three connectors right here that just go up in place, and the little levers push in, and as they push in, they reconnect the computer. I'll show you a little demonstration here. Just push it up like that and push it in. Give it a little tug, and you know that's connected and secure. Do the same thing with the remaining two there. And then you got this wire here going to this connector for the evap purge valve. Be sure to reconnect it. I've also got my power steering reservoir bolted back in. You can see that there. And then your ground cable here, I got it bolted back up on the front of the timing cover, as you can see. And then we got this other ground going up there, and then this ground coming out of the computer wire harness going up there also on that same stud. We have that tightened down. And then the other end of this cable here going from there all the way down to the front of the timing cover, we have that bolted up to the timing cover there too, and along with this ground also that shoots off of this harness here. Then I've also got this reconnected there, and I've got this bulkhead connector reconnected also, and this has the Christmas tree rivets on it that push down into the valve cover, so be sure to secure that. And don't forget, there is a ground that comes off of this harness here on the back there that bolts up to the I can't really know, I don't know if you can actually see that or not, but it goes down and it bolts up to the side of the strut tower down there. So you got to bolt that back up also. Don't forget that. And then on this side of the front valve cover here, you want to make sure that your wire harness is routed in between the dipstick tube for your transmission and the valve cover. And you can see there's another Christmas tree rivet right there that goes in that hole just beneath it. Be sure you got that in place too. And then going back to our power steering reservoir, you can see that I've got the line back on the bottom here and the hose clamp repositioned, so that's good to go. And also up underneath through the wheel well here, you can see the AC compressor over to the left. I got the power steering hose reconnected to the pipe there and the hose clamp repositioned. I also topped off the power steering fluid. Okay, we got our coolant reservoir put back in. We got 3 bolts holding it in, one right there, there, and there. And remember, there's a little foot that slides into the body, so you got to kind of slide it down into place there. Go ahead and reconnect your hose clamp down there. And then, of course, you got this hose that goes across the top of the engine here. Put it back on and slide the hose clamp back on there. Now we need to fill the cooling system, but before you fill the cooling system, be sure that your pepcock down there on the bottom left-hand side of the radiator, as you're sitting in the driver's seat, the left-hand side, be sure that it's snugged up. Now, you don't have to tighten that thing up really tight. You just want it snug because it's made of plastic and you can definitely break it, and they do break, so be careful, okay? So we have our coolant filled up. That's good to go. Now I really prefer using the airlift system or a vacuum bleeder, because you don't have to worry about air being trapped in the system somewhere and that causing a problem later on. This gets rid of all of the air in the system, and it makes sure that you have a full charge of coolant in your cooling system. So I really prefer that and recommend it. Now once you're done with that, I would advise that you take a pressure tester, hook it up to your coolant reservoir, and do a pressure test on your cooling system, checking all your hose clamps, your radiator, the entire cooling system, including the water pump, you know, that weep holes down there where I showed you. Check that, make sure nothing is leaking with on your cooling system. Once it holds, you know that it holds pressure and you don't have any leaks, then go ahead and fill the oil, change the oil filter, and then you can start this thing. So I'm going to go ahead and start this up. I've already done that. It's full of oil. I did that off camera. And let's see how this thing runs. Almost forgot. Go ahead and reconnect your negative battery cable. And that is the last thing you want to do before you start it up, is reconnect that and tighten that up with a 10mm and then start it. Alright, she's up and running. Now, I did crank it up earlier and it did clatter a little bit upon first startup. It's been sitting for a long time, so I had to pump that oil back up through there. Once I got running for about a second or so, it straightened up pretty good. Sounds pretty good. Well guys, that's it. I do appreciate you watching. Please read the entire description down below before you attempt this. There may be some things I need to clarify, and I'll do that down in the description. So please read the entire thing and also read the disclaimer at the very end. So thanks again for watching. Please like and subscribe. If you have any questions, comment down below. I'll be happy to get to you as soon as I can. Thanks again.